Well, the Apple Watch, it's expected in April, the first completely new product from Apple since the iPad. But will the smartwatch be a breakthrough for the company, the world's most valuable company indeed? Well, I talked to about the potential of this business with Piper Jaffray, senior research analyst Gene Munster.
It's going to be relatively small versus the iPad, and think about these expectations, call it 20 million units. That's going to be about half of kind of where the iPad was in its first year. And so I think that modest expectations, I think a lot of consumers that we've surveyed are still debating what the true value of the watch is, and I think developers will determine that over time.
Yeah, you know, that's what Tim Cook said. He was at the Goldman Sachs conference and talked a little bit about the experience of people using the iWatch, or the Apple Watch, I should say, at Apple headquarters, and saying there were some unique things they noticed because so many people are wearing them there, like everyone's standing up at the same moment in a meeting because they'd all been sitting down for too long and things like that. But he suggested the apps will make a difference and everyone's going to have a different favorite app.
Exactly. The roadmap here is similar to what happened with the phone. The iPhone came out. It was marginally better. What really got it exciting for people is just as developers built apps and really changed your phone into a lot of different things. And that's going to be the expectation with the watch, too, is that developers are going to actually build the true value. And so from a consumer today, they're debating what's the value. Is it just basically the same as your phone? But as developers really optimize the short versus long look, which is an important distinction about this watch, there can be new experiences built on the watch that we haven't seen yet, and it's up to those developers to really drive demand for the watch.
Now, we've reported that Apple has people in Mexico meeting with the Mexican government talking about what the watch might mean for health and things that might need, I don't know, are there things that will need government approval around the world for this watch to do?
Potentially. It depends on what the apps are, and one of the big areas of focus obviously is around health, as you mentioned, and ultimately is that some of those are more infrastructure related and more healthcare related, it could be more government and policy related, and so there are some avenues where the watch may need some government interaction. If that's the case, it probably opens up a huge opportunity for the watch, that it would be used as more kind of as a standard issued part of a healthcare system.
When you calculate your watch number, the number of units shipped for the year, what is the number and how do you come up with that number?
Well, right now it's a lot of guesswork, and what we've done is we've gone back and we've done surveys over the past year in the U.S. We've surveyed about 10,000 people and asked their interest level on that and compared that to past surveys around the iPad, and we've been able to build some demand numbers that suggest somewhere between 10 and 15 million. Now we're starting to get some build numbers out of Asia that are suggesting it's 20 million, and so it kind of gets us in that range. The reality is that this is a really difficult one to predict because it's a new category, and I think there's a lot of unknowns about which apps are going to be out there. And so I think that's our starting point, is somewhere between 10 and 20 million, and then we'll just kind of build from there.
I would think the really hard part in your model is the ASP, the average selling price, because of the big VIG over the edition watch, the 24-karat gold watch. What do you think the top-of-the-line Apple Watch is going to go for at retail?
Our best guess is somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200, so it's going to be a huge ASP. The ASP we're using in our model right now is $500. They start at around $350, and so we're expecting them to have this big number, like you said, for the high-end watch, but we're not expecting a lot of people to purchase it. But that's going to be one of the clear wild cards around the impact to the model, is what ASPs are, and for the most part, these are just guesses right now.
Do you guess that it might skew towards the, hey, look, I just bought the really expensive, top-of-the-line edition in the first 6 months, but later on it's more of a mass-market product?
I think so. I think you're going to get that kind of early adopters. They're going to want some better features and pay up for a little bit more. And then, as we've seen with the phone and the iPad over time, as we get into more of the mass-market adoption, understandably, that the ASPs tend to slide.
Gene, I wonder if we're getting to a point where Apple's looking at itself very differently as opposed to a maker of a small, call it 4 products, a handful of products that are able to be customized by the user in the way that the user uses them, to a world where Apple sees itself like a Burberry and says, we're going to have some very high-end, style-leading things that establish what our brand is for the world, and many different SKUs down the line for very different kinds of use cases. That's a very different kind of company.
It is, and we've seen this slow transition to what you just described as a more of a wide selection type of a company, and just with the iPhone going from one SKU to many, and iPad the same, and the watch, as they've already talked about, outlined a goal of having many different types of watches. And so I think that this company is very different, and the big difference here is that they recognize that one size does not fit all. They want the platform to fit everyone, but in terms of how people interact with that, they're giving a lot more options today than they did 5 years ago.
Well, we hear about them remodeling stores, possibly putting in a special private room, a jewelry-like room for the watch. Does that tell you something about how they're sort of reestablishing what the brand of Apple is?
I think they are continuing to push this high-end, this desirable brand. 2 years ago, there was a big expectation that Apple was going to drop the price of the phone to be more successful in the mass market and the emerging market, and they didn't do that. Instead, to your point, is they've really emphasized the high end. And I think that their goal is to really spend a lot of time and focus on that high end, and then but still offer some lower price products kind of for the masses, where if you can't hit that high end price product, there's still an offering that Apple has, which, by the way, is probably going to be equally as profitable for Apple for you to buy.